My name is Inga Seelemann. I'm a part of our application data and AI practice at Kyndryl Canada, and I'm joined today by Sachio Iwamoto, who is one of our chief technology officers supporting the financial services space. We're pretty excited to chat with you today around this concept of data. I'm pretty passionate about data, and Sachio is pretty passionate about a modernization and technology systems.
Yeah.
Hopefully, between the two of us, we can really help land the thesis or the thesis that we're trying to propose. There's a lot of sessions at the summit around data and the role of data, and I think it's pretty much a given today if you don't have some approach or process around really thinking about data more deeply and holistically, that you're going to be a little bit behind where your competitors might be. So the thesis that Sachio and I would like to propose to you is really around the concept of how do you actually modernize your data platform in the same way and at the same time as you think about payments and what those opportunities are, and what are some of the things that organizations really need to be tackling today in order to be able to reap the benefits of data. So that's our thesis. Modernizing the data platform and the process in association with that, really associated very closely to the process of open banking and payments modernization and other projects that you may be doing. So without further ado, let's get started. Sachio, when I
Yep.
think about some of the organizations that you've worked with over the last 10, 15 years, you've done a lot of work with many of Canada's largest banks.
Yes.
What would you say are maybe the top three trends or changes or evolutions that you've seen in the technology space from the work that you've been doing?
Yeah. Thank you, Inga. So the platform for financial industry or banking applications, including payment systems, has dramatically changed in the last 10 years. There are three key evolutions in core technologies I have seen, which are cloud native, like microservices, automation, and data as an asset. That the evolution of these three technologies helped the financial institutions to advance, accelerate their digital transformation for the last 10 years. Let me share my experience with two projects, one from 8 to 10 years ago, the other one from a couple of years ago, so that we can see how the platform evolved over time. So for the one from 8 to 10 years ago, I was leading my team to design and build a counter fraud platform in a public cloud. It was for one of major Canadian banks, and the project was to replace multiple unintegrated legacy fraud systems to centralize. The approach was to leverage COTS applications. So it was not cloud native or monolithic and running on bare metal servers or virtual machines. There was no Kubernetes back then. Docker came out, I think, 9 or 10 years ago. So we didn't use cloud native virtual machines, but we built our own hypervisor on bare metal, right? We deployed 19 security components dedicated to this platform to be PCI DSS compliant. We did not use much, automation. Most of the build tasks like provisioning and configurations were manual effort. There was not much automation used like infrastructure as code. The idea of agile, DevOps, declarative, or immutable were not applied to infrastructure or platform yet. I remember a third-party auditor came in and conducted an audit to ensure the platform is secure and compliant before going live. And it was so painful. And the remediation was very time consuming because the platform was built manually and it was quite complex. So it's easily created a lot of more technical debt. And as a result, it was multi-year projects. Today we can do the same thing much quicker. So for that, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, so that just the way you've described that project, really, the starting point has been this monolithic, big systems. Try to leverage as much as possible waterfall from a process
Exactly.
perspective, and so hard to change and adapt as things are coming. Is that that project sounds like it might have been a lot of work. So
Yeah.
what would be different for the second example that you wanted to share?
Yeah, for the second one, which was a couple of years ago, right? So the project was e-transfer platform for another major Canadian bank. It leveraged more cloud native. The platform architecture was moved to combination of container orchestration platform and cloud native VMs. It still leveraged COTS applications, uh, but most of them are container based microservices and immutable. We used cloud native PaaS, platform as a services, for databases. We used cloud native tools for monitoring and security, right? So these tools leveraged analytics and AI to automate remediation. So more automation was used. We used infrastructure as code to automatically provision infrastructure with version control system. I mean, repository like enterprise GitHub. It gave us a foundation to continuously improve the stability by applying CI/CD to infrastructure. Right? It reduced technical debt. Operation can be shifted to a SWOT model too. So also application deployment used operators to automate deployment. So for the data, the number of databases and data lakes increased as applications are refactored to microservices. It's more like, it was changed to one database per service. So it's more distributed than centralized compared to the 10 years ago. So data lakes like Hadoop and analytics engines like Spark got more tightly integrated so that data engineering, analytics, and reporting are now being performed upfront. 10 years ago, analytics was done later. Like it's more like afterthoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So less data moves, less data duplication and conflicts. So I see, the financial institutions are now looking at data as an asset to drive measurable business value.
Right. So really that trend, that concept in the application space, regardless of the business project that we're looking to deliver, has been really been evolving from
Yes.
monolithic kind of waterfall, all the people process things that change with that, to really moving up data up front, thinking about it at the beginning of the project, how you can use it, how you can drive business benefit, and then really leveraging where it makes sense, an architecture that provides you the ability to move more quickly.
Yeah.
And that, so if we were to apply that thinking, that kind of cloud first or microservices, data as an asset, automation, and we would to bring that to the topic of the day, which is really around payments. What do you think are some of the key features of a modern payments platform that need to have in order to be successful?
Yes, there are three key features of modern payment systems. One is data rich and faster, and then secure. But thinking ahead for the next few years, we need to consider these three key features in a bigger picture. When we say data rich, we should look at beyond the data that is exchanged along with the payment transaction themselves. Likewise, when we say faster, it's not just about faster settlement and reconciliation of the payment transaction themselves.
But we've got to be, thinking data rich, we've got to be faster and secure, which I think is a given across the board. So maybe we can just drill in on data rich for a second. You mentioned thinking about the data associated not just to the payments transaction. Do you have some examples or thoughts on that?
Yes, we should think about data rich in a bigger ecosystem more broadly. For example, the value of banking product gets much more impactful if banks and fintechs work together, creating a data rich product that combines both payment transaction data and customer insights data that are created by multiple LOBs of the bank. It will provide more personalized, better user experience. I mean, when we look at data rich this way, financial institutions need to think about the way to make data available easily throughout the enterprise across multiple LOBs and beyond, including partners or even merchants, right? They should be easy to integrate and well, governed with good policies. So in fact, many banks have already started partnering with fintechs.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about faster? What do you mean by that?
Or to be faster, like processes and people across multiple LOBs and the entire partner ecosystem should be looked at end to end too. Because the platform needs to be flexible and nimble enough for enterprises and partners in the ecosystem to be able to quickly react to change like acquisitions. Um, New startup quickly emerge and become a critical part of the ecosystem. So it will help the entire transaction of the future payment products or banking product gets faster and near real time end to end.
Okay, so we've got data rich, thinking about, combining data sets together to create a different experience. We need
Yeah,
to move more quickly and be able to respond to change and really start to think more real time or as close to possible in real time
yeah,
for those movements. And then you mentioned the third bullet being secure. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. Security and IAM, like identity access management, are important to everything, and we could spend the entire session, just on that. But in fact, our colleague Greg Smith will host a great session on compliance tomorrow morning. I think it's 10:45 Eastern. So please join his session as well. It's an important topic, and he will be able to do it more justice than we can do here. So I defer this to him. But
Right.
in summary, data rich, faster, secure are the key features. And the financial institutions need to consider these three key features with having the entire ecosystem in mind for future banking and payment systems.
Okay. So what are the challenges to actually making that happen? What would be preventing an organization today from moving, to this new world, from an infrastructure perspective, thinking about their products and development differently with the three things you just talked
Yeah,
about? What are some of the challenges that you're still seeing today?
yeah,
Um,
that's a good question. Yeah, yes. When we think about data rich with good security and real time in a bigger partner ecosystem to realize impactful payment system, I see three new challenges. One is a lot of data still stuck in legacy systems today, right? And then I see multiple data silos and the data latency and scalability challenges. Those three are the new challenges. um, so the first one, data stuck in legacy systems. Um, Mainframe is a good example. The mainframe has a lots of transactional data, and the systems of record is a very valuable data source, but it's not leveraged to gain customer insights today much. So a lot of customers say we want to migrate mainframe to cloud, or the mainframe is legacy. Yes, we can move mainframe applications to cloud. It's a good option for mainframe modernization and transformation. But there are other good options too, like depending on application dependencies, business constraints, and priorities or goals. Getting off the mainframe may not always be the may not be always be the best option. Sorry, my city was. So often inference modernization is not a bad option. Another similar example, there are still legacy mid-range servers too, like Unix or older version of Windows that have variable data sources, right? So it may take long time to transform them to cloud native for several reasons. So for those scenarios, you need a way to externalize variable transactional data on mainframe or mid-range servers and use it combined with the other data in the ecosystem. But a lot of customers are struggling with transforming or modernizing legacy today.
Right. I mean, I think just, not to interject, but it is a really important topic, right? Especially in this industry around, um, the mainframe isn't going to disappear like this tomorrow. And, we do need to think about ways to harness the data that's there to drive new use cases. But this concept around, in place modernization,
Yes,
or how you can work with it. So definitely something to think about. We do have ways of accessing those data sources today, and maybe work a bit more in parallel. But I interrupted you. So you were talking about sort of data and legacy systems, and then I think the second bullet you had was around
a data silo.
data silos.
Yeah. So I see many customers are struggling with data silos, right? What I hear often is I don't have access to the data. There are many reasons for that. One of them is that typically initiatives are often driven by each LOBs. And as a result, there are multiple data warehouses or data lakes, and the data is used only for that particular LOBs or functions. So it causes data duplication or conflict between LOBs, and a lot of customers are struggling with data silos and accessing to the right data.
Right. Okay. So we're gonna figure out ways to liberate, keep running our business in the highly effective mainframe. We're gonna liberate that data. We're gonna think about breaking down silos. I think the third thing you said was about latency and scalability.
Yes, latency and scalability. Let's discuss it using an example. Um, I'm sure everyone here has an experience like you call the contact center, but your call was forwarded to from department to department, and they were different. They have different information about you, or sometimes they have all the information about you and conflicting. So you explain the same thing over and over. One of my customers, a VP of contact center, actually told me recently, just redirecting the incoming call to the right digital channel instead of connecting to a general, contact center operator is a completely different story, user experience. So it might sound difficult, but minimizing false positive like this is not easy without having the customer insight based on right data real time. So if financial institutions have a data platform that makes data available across multiple LOBs with good security and governance and share and used for various channels and partners, it improves the user experience dramatically. So technical debt, like all the data, data duplication, a need of frequent data move, or lack of proper data governance, these create high data latency challenges and limit scalability.
Right. So I think we actually have a question from the audience that I think is kind of, I'm going to, maybe interject from my good friend Ram. And, one of the things he's asking a bit about is our perspective on, we've talked about we want to enrich payments data with other data sets and sources. How do we think about, we want to use models, et cetera. Certainly that's the goal to create a better user experience. But, what are some of the ways that we can secure and really think about risk management and make sure that we're not, passing malicious data as we think about some of those external data sources, in that space. And so, I think it's an interesting question, because really the intention of open banking is to create data sharing, but then we do need to stay secure across that.
Yeah.
So I wanted, Ram, I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in sort of the next part of our conversation, where we're going to talk a bit about architecture and where some of those things might land, and then we can circle back and make sure if we've addressed that question.
Yep. So yeah, in fact, I wanted to ask, Inga, with those challenges, including this, Ram's point, what should we do with these challenges about data, including maybe, I think you can touch about security, but what do you think about, how we can eliminate or mitigate these challenges to be successful with the
Right.
modern payment systems of the near future?
Right. So I think What's really interesting, we started this conversation about what is the evolution of technology, sort of in applications and infrastructure. And I think, what I would say, we've had a similar experience in the data and analytics space.
Yeah.
We really do start to think about data as a product, which is more of a microservices, aligned approach. We're much more about leveraging automation as we build out our analytics platforms, and it's really become about the decentralization of some traditional roles in the
Mm.
organization. So the first example you gave of the counter fraud platform, monolithic waterfall approach to developing that application, highly secure, lots of components, easy to audit, easy to manage the project, just took a long time and hard to change. Well, that was true of our analytics platforms as well. They were monolithic. We tended to approach them in a waterfall approach, gather requirements, build some logic, do the testing and the promotion, and then deliver a highly curated product, which added a lot of value. There's no doubt about that the traditional data warehouse has delivered a lot of value for
Mm.
organizations. Generally speaking, in those environments, the tooling was highly standardized and controlled. And, similarly, it was a bit more of a batch process. That kind of extract, transform, load process in its nature had some latency in it, and a very scheduled type of approach. And then the last piece really was around, data ownership. So
Mm.
historically, the source of data came from a line of business application. If that line of business was, let's say, HR for people data, then HR by de facto,
Yeah.
had ownership and moving data throughout the system. And while that sounds like it might be logical, the data that an HR organization needs is not necessarily the same data that you might want to have if you're building the profile of a customer who is also an employee. And so, this world of um, of our the history that we have in the analytics space actually mirrors very closely the example that you gave of the counter fraud platform in terms of where we were from a platform perspective.
So then the history, the changes that you saw in the analytics space or data platform space um, in the past, it's quite similar to what I have seen in the infrastructure or application architecture domain. So it's quite interesting. So then what what does modern data environment look like now and near future?
Yeah, so if we've applied the principles that we've applied on the application infrastructure side, and apply that to data, we really do end up with a really interesting analytics platform that is very catered to
Mm.
delivering use cases in a secured environment. So let's think about what's really changed, similar to what you described. We've had the rise of the data scientist, as it were, but
Yep.
whether they're a citizen data scientist or there's been a recognition that we really do want to drive value from data, and that there are specialized roles who can do that. So that's been a bit on the people front. There's been a lot of focus historically on my data has to be 100% clean. That data science role is able to work with data that isn't 100%, and 80% is good enough kind of approach. And
Yeah.
so it's really enabled us to start to think about, okay, well, if I don't have to deliver a perfectly curated product, what can I deliver?
Mm.
And the last piece is really about time. If we're building machine learning models and we want to execute against those, we really don't have time to execute kind of this traditional process of data movement. So
Mm.
the concept really is around, in an analytics world, is really around creating data as a product. And you do
Mm.
that in the same way that you do with applications as a product. You create a product owner, and that person or that role isn't necessarily aligned to the line of business. So now
Mm.
when you think about an employee or customer, the source of where the data comes from isn't necessarily dictating data ownership. We really build a concept of subject matter expert in the business on that data, and that person in that role is really to take into account all of the potential consumers of that data set. So now it's marketing, it's sales, it's retail banking, it's and they need to serve that data in a way that meets all their consumers. So it very much mirroring how you might develop a line of business application,
That's
mirroring
yeah.
that approach. And what that creates ultimately is really more of a federated approach to your analytics platform.
Mm.
It's how you introduce speed into delivery, because you can actually really reduce the requirements that you have, very tailored to the consumer populations that you have. This is ultimately powered, just as you talked about with infrastructure as code, through automation. And so it makes a lot of sense that as I build a pipeline to move data, I'm going to monitor that pipeline. I'm going to manage it the same way that I would my infrastructure platform. I'm going to apply security to it, and have automation around those pieces. And I'm going to promote it from the development lifecycle
Mm.
through an automated fashion. So the terminology is, DevSecOps or data ops or even machine learning ops are sort of the philosophies that piggyback onto the development that we have within Agile. And so ultimately, you end up in this world where I've created an environment where I'm not restricting the way that data is served. I'm creating the ability for different user populations within my organization to consume that data. I'm securing
Mm.
it and managing the guardrails in which I'm working,
Yep.
while creating a federated space. And so this concept of data fabric, data mesh, there's a lot of terms in the industry, is really that future of an analytics platform that we see organizations embracing.
Mm. So you mentioned philosophy. You're explaining that you're applying the same philosophy or principles that we did for
Mhm.
application and infrastructure to the data as well, right? So how can our customers implement these changes and modernize their data platform?
Right. I mean, I wish there was like some magic wand that would make this, this is the secret sauce, but it really hasn't changed. It's people, it's process, and it's technology.
Mm.
So if we think about people, um, change isn't driven. I was, just as an aside, I was listening to the Gartner debrief on their chief data officer survey, and in the top three issues that face organizations who want to use data more is culture. And
Mm.
the ability to do that, just a stat that that happened live. It really isn't about, I'm going to force you to use this tool, and if you use the tool, I have adoption and I'm check. It really is about, do you understand what it is you're doing when you're entering data or consuming data, and how it is that you drive? And that's that piece about culture, and people in terms of that space. But more broadly, the people space from an IT perspective, this is probably the toughest change that we're seeing. Um, Historically, that monolithic model, it was very tightly controlled and very managed, and we had a high degree of certainty and we had a high degree of confidence. And to Ram's question, right? There was just really tight guardrails, and I was able to deliver tight guardrails. In this more loosely coupled, federated model, what IT really needs to think about is, how can they provide that same level of security and governance in the framework, and enable within the framework some tooling. And so there's some interesting architectures that are coming from the various hyperscalers around how to deploy this, and players in the analytics space who really are trying to think about, I'm going to land a data set. To Ram's point, I'm going to mash it up with some other pieces. How can I in-flight process and ensure that what I'm bringing together, is from a trusted source, is secure, et cetera. But it's less about controlling that process and more taking a step aside and creating a framework. So one example, just to deviate to talk a little bit about what Ram's question was, maybe your future data platform will incorporate tooling that tokenizes data, for example, and creates a process for you to seamless to the user, as you're bringing it in. But it really is thinking about it from the enablement perspective and lens, as opposed to like a focus on governance, if that makes sense, which is a bit of a pivot. So from a people perspective on the IT side, we really need architects to be focused less on the specifics of the technology offering as it is being consumed by the end product, and more thinking about how they can enable. And so that's the first area. The second area really is around thinking about data as infrastructure. And I think there's the people who are on the call who know me. I've been talking about this for a little while, right? But I think we have a lot to learn from the world of infrastructure. Let us monitor pipelines. Let's think about automation in the same way so that we can have confidence. And certainly we're seeing, the rise of that tooling. And then, the technology piece really is around the operating model. So there's a people component where I'm thinking less about governing the specifics, and I'm thinking more about an enablement, interconnected, federated framework. And what does that operating model look like across the organization? So those are really the three things: people, process, and technology. It hasn't changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think, you touched about security and, to the point that Ram's question, your story reminded me about DevSecOps. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned culture,
Yeah,
right? And you mentioned think about data as an infrastructure.
yeah,
And when we move into DevSecOps, traditionally security like incident was treated as an incident, right?
yeah,
Now, as part of DevSecOps, we treat security incident as a like software bug as part of the process.
right.
And this requires more like cultural shift or mindset shift for the security department and also operations and
Yeah,
development, right? So I really resonate what you said, people, process, and technology. Those are all together can tackle, security compliance in
yeah.
terms, in the context of data. That's what I
Mm.
understood
Yeah,
your
absolutely.
explanation, right?
Absolutely.
So now Inga then, bringing this all together, modernizing your data platform and together with modernizing payment platform, what tangible benefit does it offer?
Well, I think that's really where the rubber hits the road, right? I mean, the
Yep.
easy answer is to say the sky's the limit, ultimately. Uh,
Wow.
but let's go back to what the intent of open banking is and the intent of payments modernization.
Yep.
Ultimately, I mean, the
Yep.
intent is to the 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 reason for this happening really is to create and drive innovation from a product and services perspective. And so that's really the place to start to see where the opportunities or the benefits might lie. And I like to think about these in kind of two ways. I like to think about them in the terms of customer experience, which is what we do hinge our all of our business on, ultimately that customer experience. And
Yep.
then the other side of that is how that customer experience can learn. You can learn from that to drive product innovation. So let's think about customer experience. And you talked a bit about the contact center example and being landed in the wrong channel.
Yep.
Those types of things. Historically, we have thought about customer experience as a channel and product view. So if I'm going to have a product and you have the call center, then this is how the call center supports that product, right? Or this is how the chatbot does, or here's how the website does. And we cater to a certain extent our experience to the product and the channel execution through which we're going to allow ourselves to do that.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't really work anymore for a large population of our customers. The millennials, the Gen Zs. I mean, let's just call them the natives. The people who have grown up with a cell phone in their hands and don't remember the world before the first
Yep.
iPhone. It's less about that, kind of the device, or that it's more about how they approach and think about their buying or engagement experience. Let's say engagement experience.
Yep.
So that demographic, that digital native demographic, really focuses and leverages social media. And I mean, I don't even know what all the platforms are anymore, right? I'm just trying to keep up myself on a couple of them, but maybe I'm showing my age there a little bit, but they really do rely on social media. And I mean,
Yep.
there's some stats that are something like a third of
That's true.
millennials will make, if offered a discount, will potentially, accept that discount and make a purchase decision, but only if the brand reputation is something that they can sign off on. So they do actually
Yes.
consider social media from a brand representation. So they're looking for different types of experiences. And I read a stat this week: 52% of purchases in 2021 were made through a digital wallet. Now, certainly COVID and other things, have contributed to that, but it just really speaks to, the decline of cash and those payment mechanisms, and really the rise of some of these non-traditional payments. Um, so, and then like 65% of millennials don't carry a credit card, and which again, I don't understand. I have a bunch of them in my wallet, so I can't necessarily relate to some of these experiences. But it's important to really think about my experience versus maybe this digital native
Yep.
experience in terms of how I might um, how I might want to experience. And so that view of what your customer experience looks like. How are you able to understand, not Inga Seelemann's experience necessarily, but the category of people that I fall
Yep.
into, and from there glean the insight that I need, and then what's the product innovation
Yep.
that I can drive. So an example of product innovation could be, um, something like paying your rent, uh, as an
Mm,
example. Um, you know, most people today still pay rent by checks.
that's true.
In fact, I read a number like there's 1 billion checks written a year, so that the check is not dead. Average
No,
Canadians write 2 checks a month,
it's
right? So I've got to
decreasing,
pay my
not no.
rent.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. So we're still doing that. Um, so now I think, okay, so that's the use case. I've got this experience. So what is my experience? Well, we've responded by creating mobile applications, so I can scan the check, et cetera, and then I can do some digitization of that process, which is a great first step. Doesn't change the fact that I still have to have a check, and it
True.
doesn't change the fact that my personal experience with that, I may not want to pay by check. It also doesn't change the fact that I actually, as the renter, have very little control if I'm late by a day or something for not getting
Mm,
penalized. Maybe I'll have a late payment reported to a credit bureau. So I'm engaging in a transaction that could actually help my credit score, but I have very, little opportunity to actually, proactively report that. So again, customer experience, kind of this payment mechanism that we have. And so one of the fintechs that's coming out of Europe is a renter platform, and basically you create yourself as a profile, and you create this experience where you choose your payment mechanism, and
mm,
they provide the settlement engine, so I can see that I have in fact paid.
mm,
They've thought about that kind of credit experience, and so I can opt in to have a credit report sent to my local, credit bureau. So if I'm paying on time and I know I'm doing that, then I can start to work on my credit score. I can use credit card, debit card, bank account. Like, it's creating that experience. And then there's a social aspect, which is I can invite my landlord to participate in the platform as well. So I've got customer experience. I want to do things in a different way. I
yeah.
want to leverage, different types
Mm,
of applications, mobile experiences. I want this to become painless for me as the customer. We describe the process and then think about something that you might do differently, and then really reimagine what that process would look like. So, I mean, it's one example. Checks. I don't think checks are going to go away, the next 5 years either. But I think it really is the combination of deeply understanding customer experience,
yeah.
where those pain points are, and where the opportunities are, to create new products and services that then kind of create this flywheel effect of an improved customer experience, and then product innovation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I truly do believe the sky is the limit.
Yeah. So I think the buying behavior of young generations that you mentioned is a interesting story. And also, the check, like, property owners, like I actually use check as well. But, the key is really to realize it, we need to combine, customer insights data and
Mm-hmm.
payment modernization and payment data. So to summarize, I think payment modernization needs to go hand in hand with data modernization
Yeah.
to deliver the best customer experience and to enable product innovation.
Yeah.
So I think that's the summary.
Yeah. We do have one
And
more question from Ram. He's talking a bit about the open services and the timeline and readiness. And I mean, I think that's a true statement. This is
yeah,
this is a marathon. Is that the saying? This is a marathon, not a sprint. But you can do a lot, with Read. You can really use that as the opportunity to start to deeply understand, you know, customer experience, member experience, and in Ram's case, and where the opportunities might lie. Deeply understand how your organization is delivering. I think about buy now, pay later. That's a product that's very popular, right? And how's that product landed? How is it rolled out? If you're an organization, maybe that's delivered that, or a version of payroll loans is another product area that there's been some change in. So I think Ram really, we have to start somewhere. We have to start with it. And at the end of the day, I think it really is looking internally around that customer experience and really modernizing the data platform so that you're ready, to be able to deliver on what the potential opportunities might be, and or who you might want to partner with, for some of the products and services that are being delivered.
Yeah, and I think we are very carefully monitoring, watching what's going on in Canada, because the reaction is different. Like Europe is, and Australia and
Right.
US. By depending on the country, their direction is different. I think
Yeah.
Canada is very close to where US is going, right? Then which is more focused on the consumer side, which I like. That approach is I personally likes, but
Mhm.
it's coming soon, as Ram mentioned. So we carefully watch what's going to happen. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Before we wrap up, any other questions? We've just been picking on Ram a little bit.
we
Any
have
other thoughts
five
from the
minutes.
audience?
Yeah, we have 5 minutes still.
And there's a correction. So when we wrap up at the end, Sachio, actually, Greg is on tomorrow at 1 Eastern, not at 10.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. Oh, okay.
Mm.
Okay. So then I think um, we are still here, and we have what the one-on-one session as well. So you can book us if you have any questions. So if you want a white paper to learn about our data modernization or data management services or advanced automation, any best practice, any question, please contact us. Utilize our one-on-one session as well. And I would say thank you for joining our breakout session. I hope you all enjoyed. And don't forget joining Greg. And tomorrow you said 1 p.m.
And 1
Eastern.
p.m.
1 p.m.
Yep.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, please enjoy the rest of the payment summit. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.